The member for Moncrieff.
Mr Speaker, I rise this afternoon to speak about an issue that's very important in my constituency on the Gold Coast, and that is the level of lawlessness that is on the Gold Coast. The reality is that the Gold Coast has struggled significantly. We've gone from being Australia's tourism capital to now, unfortunately, being dubbed Australia's crime capital. And the reason that we are, Mr Deputy Speaker, comes down to effectively one reason only, and that is the state Labor Government's unwillingness to provide the police resources that the Gold Coast needs. The Gold Coast has been Australia's fastest growing city for decades now. Its population now is around 500,000 people. Unfortunately though, Mr Speaker, the Queensland Labor Government still continues to acknowledge that in a city of the size of the Gold Coast, we do not have adequate police resources. In 2001, in my first federal election campaign, one of the platforms I fought for was more police. Now, it is difficult for me as a federal member of parliament, of course, Mr Speaker, to be able to deliver more police. But the call was clear from the community that our city needed more. Following that election, I was successful, together with the efforts of my state Liberal colleagues, in securing 86 additional police at the time. Since then, though, the numbers of police on the Gold Coast has flatlined. Since then, though, the number of crimes have increased. And although, Mr Deputy Speaker, there have been examples of the way in which the crime rate on the coast has fallen with respect to certain offences, the overall level of lawlessness has increased. And it is a very, very large gap, Mr Speaker, between the level of crime in the Gold Coast community and the level of crime in the next policing district within Queensland. The fundamental issue, in addition to the fact that there are not enough police, Mr Deputy Speaker, is the fact that on any given night on the Gold Coast there are approximately 70,000 tourists holidaying there. That's the equivalent of a small town. And they are not even considered when it comes to police resourcing on the Gold Coast. So not only are there too few police, but we also have that consequence multiplied by virtue of the fact that on any given night we have the equivalent of a small town staying on the Gold Coast as well, and that population is ignored when it comes to police resourcing. Now, the police on the Gold Coast do an outstanding job. They certainly go well and truly above and beyond their call of duty. That notwithstanding, though, Mr Speaker, there is an enormous amount of frustration within the police force at their lack of resourcing from the state Labor Government. And that's the reason why, Mr Speaker, many of us on the Gold Coast were so deeply cynical at the state Labor Government's recent announcement that the Gold Coast would be provided with 50 additional police. You see, following the very unfortunate and tragic death of police officer Leading recently on the Gold Coast, Mr Deputy Speaker, there have, of course, been a record number of armed robberies in the city. So the state Labor Government, in an acknowledgement or a fob of the hat that there was a law and order problem on the Gold Coast, announced with much fanfare the allocation of 50 additional police for the city. The catch, though, Mr Speaker, was that the 50 extra police were for 1 month. For 1 month, the Gold Coast was supplied with 50 additional police. And I, like many in the community, just thought it indicated the arrogance and the lack of commitment from the state Labor Government to provide the police that we need. Now, so far, Operation Seymour, as it's dubbed, which has seen the allocation of 50 uniformed officers to the Gold Coast, has seen 1,974 people being charged with some 2,880 offences. But the question is, Mr Speaker, what happens when the operation ends in coming days? Will the Crims come back from holidays? I suspect so. Will we see more armed robberies and shootings and murders on the Gold Coast again, now that it's been dubbed Australia's crime capital? I suspect so. And the reality is, Mr Speaker, that as a community we are fed up with the state Labor Government's inability to do something meaningful when it comes to crime on the Gold Coast. It is so bad that we actually required the local council to provide $500,000 in funding for a police helicopter trial because the state government wouldn't step up to the plate. So now ratepayers' money is being used instead of Queensland Government taxes that we all contribute to try to do something about our law and order issue. The fact is, people are cynical of the state Labor Government because they're simply not up to the task. We deserve better. I'll continue to fight for more police and won't settle until we secure the extra officers that we need.